Well, last week I started, if you were there last week, by asking you to imagine that tonight was your last night with your friends and family, and then you were going to die. And what would you do and what would you say on that last night? And I had some people kind of tease me and laugh about that with me, but it's really important because that's the exact scenario Jesus was in when he taught the things that we're going to talk about today out of the Gospel of John. Jesus on that night drove deeper and deeper and deeper into what it really means to be a disciple. So we're going to talk more about that today. On that last night, Jesus washed the disciples' feet. He did that to show that the ultimate expression of love is in service to others. And he, as our rabbi, us as disciples, were to follow his example. So what I want to do over this week and next week is just kind of walk through these chapters that really show us what it was that Jesus said and did on his last night before the crucifixion. So we're in John chapter 13, and we read about the foot washing. And then what happens is, over the course of chapters 13 and 14, Jesus has some conversations with different individuals. He talks to Judas, he talks to Thomas, he talks to Peter. And then he says this. He makes this statement in John 13:33. He says, "Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come." And when Jesus said that, they then asked him, what do you mean by that? Why can't we follow you? Where are you going? And so now Jesus is going to say something else very significant that gives us more insight into what it means to be a disciple. And in a nutshell, it's this. I'll say it, then I'll explain it. It's intimacy. Discipleship requires intimacy. Let me show you why I say that. When Jesus gives that answer, they talk a little bit more. Then we get to John chapter 14, verses 1 through 4. And Jesus still explaining things. He says this to the disciples. He says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be. And you know the way to where I am going." So let's walk through this scripture. Some of you may be familiar with this. I've learned many people that this would maybe be the first time you're going to get this cultural insight into what Jesus is saying, because we understand what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is going to go to heaven, and he's going to prepare a place in heaven for us. And then when he's ready, he's going to return and bring us to himself at the end of time, right? So we know that that's what Jesus is referencing, but it's even more significant to the people of his day in the Jewish culture, because everything Jesus just laid out actually is illustrated by the way that a wedding took place in the Jewish culture. So let me walk you through the verses again. Jesus says, listen, you don't have to worry, because in my Father's house are many rooms, and I'm going there. I'm going to my Father's house, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. Now, in the Jewish culture, when a young man and a young woman were engaged, and actually in America here, we have the term engaged. We first get engaged, and then we get married, right? But in the Jewish culture, it was a little bit different. They were betrothed, and betrothed was really stronger than engaged. It was like you were already married, but it wasn't quite official yet. So it was a very committed state to be in. So when a man and a woman got betrothed, the man would then go back to his father's house, and the homes were often built in a U-shape format. It was called an insula. And the young man would go back, and he would literally add on to his father's house. And when it was done, he would go and he would get his bride, and he would bring her to himself. So this is what he would do. And so it makes more sense when we see multiple times Jesus shares parables tied into weddings, doesn't he? And he talks about the bride saying, listen, you don't know exactly when the groom's coming, so make sure you stay ready, right? Maybe you've read those parables from Jesus. Jesus says, listen, don't let the oil go out in your lamp, because the groom's going to come back, but you don't know exactly when. Of course, they didn't have cell phones and selfies, and he couldn't send her pictures of the house and the update and all that stuff. So what Jesus is doing here, he's helping them to understand what he's saying, deeply profound. He's going back into eternity, but he's going there for a purpose, to prepare a place for them, because on a deeper, more intimate level, we are his bride. All who have come to faith in him are his bride. So he's going to prepare a place. And they understand it because that was how a wedding was done in their day. So Jesus, he's talking about intimacy. He's saying, listen, I am the groom. I'm your husband. You're the bride. You're my wife. I'm going to go for a little while, but it's only so that we can then be together forever. And I get pretty excited about this because, you know, in a fun way to look at it, the Bible tells us that it took God 6 days to create the heavens and the earth. And they're pretty magnificent, and they fill us with awe, the sky and the stars and everything. Bible says it took him 6 days. Jesus has been gone for 2,000 years preparing a place for us. I can't imagine what that's going to be like, but I'm looking forward to it. Corinthians says, truly no eye has seen, no ear has heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man the things God has in store for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So Jesus wants us to understand beyond the shadow of a doubt that our discipleship relationship is based on love and intimacy. It's not a boss-employer relationship. It's a relationship founded and grounded and abiding in love. Jesus loves us with that kind of passionate love. So in the next chapter, he's going to explain more what that looks like. I just want to mention it today. He talks about us abiding, and that's an important word. We must be intentional. We must cultivate the relationship with him, right? So here's what we read in John 15, verses 9 and 10, still in the context of that last evening. He says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Then he says this, abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. To be a disciple, we must abide. And specifically here, he says we must abide in his love. Now, the word abide, I think we understand it, but let me just give you a biblical context of the word abide. It means to remain with or to reside. We are literally to reside. We're literally to live within the reality of God's love for us. And again, discipleship, we're going to produce fruit. We're going to talk about that soon. We're going to produce, disciples produce fruit for the kingdom, but it's not established on an employer-employee work relationship. We do all that we do out of a heart of love because we are abiding in God's love, his provision for us, his care for us, his direction for us. So Jesus, in John 15:15, he says this, no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Everything we do as believers in Jesus, we do out of love, not out of obligation. God is not a taskmaster barking out orders to us as if we were servants. That would have been normal in their culture, so they would have really understood that. And Jesus said, you know how the master barks orders at the servants? They're like, oh yeah, we get that. He says it's nothing like that. It's not like that. It's like a child or like a husband-wife relationship. You are his beloved. You're his bride. And he's partnering with you to get the work done that he wants to do in the world. When God took Israel as his bride in the Old Testament, he did that because God wanted the ancient world to see him and his truth through Israel. God partnered with the nation of Israel so that the pagan nations of the world would be able to see and know God through Israel. And now today he has founded the church, and the church now is the bride of Christ. It's an intimate, close relationship, and Jesus has called us to partner with him to reach the world with the good news of the gospel. And it's a partnership that is born out of love. So Jesus says, if you really want to be my disciple, you have to be rooted in the reality that I love you. And now, I've taught all this for the last few minutes because I started in John chapter 14, verse 1, where Jesus used the analogy of a wedding to talk about his care and his provision for us as his disciples. You know, weddings are a really big deal to God. Weddings are a really big deal. You open up the Bible, what's the first thing you see in human history? I mean, it's basically a wedding. It's Adam and Eve, right? You go all the way to the end of the Bible. I hate to ruin it for you if you haven't seen the end of the book, but have you been to the end of the book? The last event you see in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, is a wedding. It's a wedding between Jesus, who is the groom, and the church, who is the bride. Guys, weddings are a really big deal. The Bible starts and it ends with a wedding. Not only that, but Jesus' first miracle is at a wedding. So you start to get the idea that intimacy, passion, love, partnership, these are a really big deal to God. And he desires us intimately to walk with him. The fruit that we produce as disciples, we produce it out of a loving relationship with God who is passionate and intimate with us. So that's what it means to be a disciple. Let's talk more about that, and I look forward to being more next week.